Hello there. You are watching Chapter 25 of my TearRing Saga Champions of Utena low turn count playthrough. This is the second desert map of the game, and there is a whole lot of hidden treasure all over the map, and this is the reason why I decided to bring a second thief with Runan's army, in the form of Bud. Now, fortunately for us, this map is actually only half desert. But unfortunately for us, that is because there is a mess of fortifications on the other half of the map that is just as much of a pain to get through. According to the plot, this desert is known as the Halfa Desert, and the fortress is known as the Forts of Halfa, and these stand between us and finally reaching Runan's homeland of Rosalia. But we are once again only contending with the forces of the traitorous nobles, as well as some mercenaries, rather than the full might of the Empire of Canaan. Navigating the fortress zone requires us to break down several gates, and the first thing I do on this map is have Mariel one-hit KO one of them. It's very useful to be able to just instantly destroy these, in order to prevent Runan from being blocked off. And Vega is also going to be doing a bit of that later on, using the Silver Sword. The general strategic situation in this map is that we are faced with a large number of enemy archers, and all of these are sitting on top of the tower terrain that grants them extra range. There is a ballistician in roughly the middle of the fortress who also benefits from the tower terrain, and so he is covering an 8-tile radius around himself, which we're going to have to be quite wary of. Obviously, the easiest way to reach these enemy archers to kill them is to have Raffen fly up to them, and he is generally capable of doing this safely because he can live a hit from most of the enemies as long as he doesn't get in range of the ballista. But obviously, using a flyer against archers is not an ideal scenario. Meanwhile, all of my other mounted units have to dismount in order to proceed through this fort, because the stair tiles that pepper it are not traversable by mounted cavalry units. Another notable thing here is that in this map, I am going to remember to have Runan equip the shield blade, so he is going to be fairly well equipped to shrug off the enemy arrows as he proceeds through the fort. Raphael used an occult book on turn 1 rather than stat booster because it's important to have his level uncapped later on, and this was the most ideal place to do it. Of course, that means he was unable to attack an enemy on turn 1, but since he had to dismount, he wasn't going to be able to do that anyway. Now, the unfortunate thing here is that I actually made a mistake on this map, and this is probably my biggest regret in the entire run. So, Plum is able to walk freely over the desert terrain, and that means that if Runan goes across it, she is able to dance him on every turn. I didn't notice until halfway through my practice run that Plum was able to do this, and then I failed to go back and recheck what the fastest way to do the first half of the map was. And so, when I was reviewing this run for commentary, I saw it and I was like, oh no, what if I had danced Runan over the desert? And so I went and checked it against the map, and it looks like, yes, it probably is faster to do that instead of winding through the fortress with Runan. Amusingly enough, doing it that way would also have been a bit safer because Runan would have had to take fewer attacks from all of the archers. In any case, it's really frustrating for me that I, even with all my meticulous planning, managed to lose a turn to not counting tiles correctly. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do about that, and I'm not even really in a position to be able to check whether my suspicion that I could have saved an extra turn is true without replaying half the game. So, yeah, we're just going to move on from that. On the brighter side, my blunder there does mean that Plum is available to dance for Raphael on this turn to get him ahead. He still needs to get as much experience into himself as possible, so it's important to get him towards the enemies as fast as possible. And here, he is taking out a dangerous arbalest enemy to keep everyone safe in the area. Mariel proves that she is perfectly capable of still one-hit KOing things that are not doors here, as she casually deletes one of the bow soldiers close to the starting point. Now, the enemy density on this map is not very high, so there's not a great deal to talk about. So let's move on to discussing the objectives of this map. This is once again a siege map, where Runen needs to reach one of the tiles on the far right of the map in order to complete it. But this actually has two options for tiles for Runen to seize, and that is because this is the only route split in the game. If Runen seizes the upper castle, we will go to the chapter that's commonly known as Chapter 26A, which is where we're going, because that map is quite friendly to LTC, and is also quite easy to complete, although there is an interesting gimmick on it, which we'll talk more about in the next video. The alternative siege point involves heading south over the desert, and that takes us to Chapter 26B. That map is absolutely horrible for LTC. In my last run, I actually went to Chapter 26B because I was trying to see everything that I hadn't gone to in my first run of this game. And trying to LTC that map was disastrous. It is an indoor map with a lot of tight corridors, and that means that it suffers from the same problem for LTCing that I've mentioned before, with enemies blocking up where you need Runen to move in order to seize in the lowest amount of turns. And that's compounded by the fact that a bunch of enemy reinforcements appear in that map from near the siege point, making it inordinately difficult to keep Runen's way clear for the whole map. In addition, there is a particularly complicated recruitment scenario there. Arcus abandons your army for the map, and shows up as a seemingly generic Shadow Lancer, and in order to recruit him, you have to get past him and keep him alive for the entire map, while you recruit another unit who is the only one who is able to talk him back onto your side. The sole possible benefit to going to Chapter 26B is that it has the only Swift potion in the game, which is the equivalent of boots in Fire Emblem games, granting +3 movement. But that's really not worth all of the trouble that you have to go through in order to get it, and it definitely doesn't save the 9 or so turns that it's going to cost to go there. Despite all that I've just said, Runen is now heading south into the desert, but that's because he needs to talk to the green unit in the middle of the desert, Narcus, because we are finally recruiting him on this map. Obviously, since Runen is going so far out of his way, this is once again a place where full recruitment costs us turns, but in the case of Narcus and his special abilities, it is well worth it in the end. Narcus is going to be helping Bud pick up hidden items once we recruit him, so that's something that he does immediately to help us out. In the lower right part of this map, guarding the second siege point, is a squad of Wyvern Knights called the Condor Squad, and these guys are pretty damn scary. For starters, they all give each other 10% support bonuses, which means that if you fight them all at once, you are facing enemies with +40 to their hit, avoid, critical, and dodge, which is a real uphill battle to get through. Also, their AI causes them to clump together around their leader as much as possible. And they all have spears, so it's not safe to attack them at 2 range either. They are triggered to start moving towards you under 2 conditions. Firstly, if you get close enough to the northern siege point and don't kill the boss, they will come to help him. And secondly, if any of your units get within their range, they will move to attack that unit, and then clump up afterwards so that they don't lose their support bonuses. Obviously, neither scenario is particularly attractive for me, so I'm going to be doing my best not to bait them out at all for the entire map. And honestly, since they are guarding the seize point for Chapter 26B, that is yet another reason why going to 26B is so unattractive. Because fighting your way through a bunch of flyers on a desert map? Well, go play Chapter 14 of The Binding Blade if you don't know how bad that is. Their leader starts out sitting on top of a dragon potion, which could be nice to get, but with all the trouble that we'd have to go through to get it, yeah, no thanks. But the Condor Squad does have one extra use, and that is their role in the most complicated recruitment event in the entire game. Rishel is heading south to a specific house in the lower left of this map, and there he is going to be recruiting Rebecca. Rebecca is a cleric who comes with a summon staff and the summon skill at base, and she's fairly competent, although we're not going to be seeing all that much use out of her. But Rebecca is in fact secretly a Samson and Aaron situation, where she is a unit where you can either recruit her or a different unit depending on your choices throughout the game. And that is what the second recruitment is all about. The alternative to Rebecca is called Latina, and the sequence of events to recruit her is widely known as the Latina event in the fandom of this game. In order to unlock her, you need to backtrack several times to Verge with both Arcus and Chryse in Holmes's army in the first route split. After that, in this map, you need to bait out the Condor Squad and kill a specific member, Marco, with Chryse, who, as I mentioned, is a pretty difficult unit to get up to speed. And after that, Chryse has to schlep across the desert to the house that Rebecca is in, and instead of Rebecca, he will recruit Latina there. Latina is overall a pretty similar unit to Rebecca, except that she has Paragon at base and learns Summon at a later level, as opposed to Rebecca, who starts with Summon at base and learns Paragon after leveling up a bit. Overall, I prefer having Summon as a base skill, but Latina also has one extra thing up her sleeve, and that is her personal staff, the Silence Staff. Silence is the first offensive staff that we see in this game, and its effect is to silence the enemy, preventing them from using magic. Offensive staves in this game have infinite range, and they target up to the user's magic number of enemies on the map. Each unit targeted then has a chance of being afflicted with the effect of said offensive staff. And I'm not sure what the exact probability of an offensive staff's effect happening to one of its targets is, but it's reasonably high, and it's not to be underestimated. Silence does have some potential utility in an LTC playstyle, but I personally don't think it is anywhere near worth the hoops you have to jump through in order to get it in this game. So I'm quite happy to pick up Rebecca here rather than bothering with Latina. Raphael is now finishing off the Ballistician, which is good, and we once again use the save staff to rig his level up to get speed. He also got strength here, but that strength point is actually unnecessary at this stage. Meanwhile, we are almost through the rest of the fortress, as Vega is just cutting down the second to last door that we have to go through, and almost all of the enemies are dead now. I very deliberately refuse to have Mariel use Aura Rain on this turn, because while it would damage all of the enemies on the map, the trouble is it has pretty low might, so it's unlikely to kill any of them, and also damaging the Condor Squad might cause them to move. I wasn't sure about this when I was playing, but I definitely didn't want to risk having them bear down on me before I was ready to end the map. Bud has been happily wandering around the map picking up hidden items, including a Goddess Potion and a Canto Scroll. The Goddess Potion is more or less nothing, but the Canto Scroll is definitely going to go to Raphael, since he never learns it by leveling up, and having it means that he can engage in combat while still advancing towards his objectives. Bud also picks up a Spirit Potion on this turn, and that is not going to go to Raphael, one of the few stat boosters that isn't. It's going to have an important purpose on a different unit later on, though. And now, after 16 chapters, we finally get to pick up Narcus for good and keep him. So he wastes no time in heading straight into the Condor Squad's range in order to pick up an energy potion. For some reason, Narcus is able to go into the Condor Squad's range without triggering them to move, and I think that probably has something to do with him starting the map as a green unit quite close to their position, as some sort of mercy feature to prevent him from being murked before you could ever reach him. Narcus is okay as a thief, and we definitely value his ability to pick up some hidden items on this map, but his real power comes from the special skill that he has, Imitate. Imitate is very similar to the abilities of Zane from the Fire Emblem Arcanea games, but it's a little bit different in several ways. Firstly, Narcus is able to copy enemy units in addition to player units. I believe there are some limitations on his ability to copy non-human enemies, but overall, he's able to use it on pretty much any unit you want him to. The other difference from Zane is that Narcus does not copy his target's stats exactly. Instead, he takes on the target's class, and for most of his stats, all that happens is that he merely changes class bases and adds his personal stats onto those, as if he was promoting into their class. For HP, he instead takes the average of his HP and his target's HP as his new HP. Now, you may not think that this sounds very strong overall, because it means you can't completely mimic your strongest units. But Narcus's true strength is in the fact that because he is changing class, he actually picks up the other unit's class skills. As a side note, preventing him from being able to copy Plum's dance is probably the reason why there isn't actually a dancer class in this game. But that doesn't matter, because there is another unit with a similarly broken skill that is in fact a class skill, and Narcus is going to be copying them quite a lot in the later maps of this run. So that is Narcus in a nutshell, and I would like to add that I absolutely love the fact that instead of just being a common thief, he actually has some pretty major espionage skills rolled into the mix. Now, while I was describing Narcus, Rishal rolled down to the house and picked up Rebecca for us. So that's one thing less to do, and there are now practically no enemies left on the map outside of the bosses. All that we need to do is have Runan move back towards the seize point, getting danced wherever possible to speed him up. Here you will see I am making use of Plum's extra movement over the desert in order to dance him on every turn as he heads back up into the tail end of the fortifications. At this stage in the map, there is pretty much no risk that the Condor Squad getting aggroed is going to cause any real chance of harm to any of my units. However, because I am a bit paranoid, I'm making sure that Rishal, Bud, Narcus, and Rebecca are running as far away from their range as they can possibly get, while still picking up one last hidden item with Narcus on the way. Now, in the lower right, you will see that there are actually two houses that I haven't talked about yet. The blue-roofed house obviously is another skill house, and this one teaches frontiersmen, which would of course be very useful, but unfortunately I don't have time to get anyone who can really make use of it down there within the constraints of the run. The other house down there is a secret shop, and in fact during my practice run I did have Rishal visit that secret shop, which contains a large number of staves, including the physics staves that I was after. In this final clear though, I had decided that I didn't really need any extra physics staves for the rest of the run, and that left the member key completely unused in this run, which is a bit of a shame. On this turn, I am having Runan stay 6 tiles away from the seize point, which means that he is 1 tile short of reaching it on his next move. But there is a reason for this, and that is that if he goes into the gate, where he is 5 tiles from the boss, the boss will actually move to attack him, and I do not want that to happen. So instead I keep him back and rely on Plum to dance him that one extra tile on the next turn. And now I am once again using the save staff to rig a level up on Raphael, because he is about to face the boss and gain a full level from that. Raphael has gained 3 levels thus far, and he has picked up 3 speed points and 3 strength points, which means he only needs 1 more speed point to hit his benchmarks, and that means this is the last level up rig we have to go through. I'm sure that is going to come as a relief to many of you, because that was taking up quite a lot of time in these videos. The boss kill strategy that we're going to be using is having Raphael use the hammer. He is not fast enough to double with this, and because, as I've mentioned before, the hammer has truly atrocious hit in this game, his accuracy is absolutely garbage. But because he has a player phase and an enemy phase to do this, and the enemy phase means that the boss is losing his terrain bonus, whether by moving off the fort or from the effect that we discussed back in Chapter 18, this is reasonably likely to succeed over those 2 phases. As it happens, we cleanly one-hit KO, which means that we don't bait out the Condor squad even on this last turn. And Raphael picks up the 1 speed point that he needs to finish his leveling up. And with that, the map is over, with that 1 bishop running down into the desert in order to avoid being attacked. And to be honest, that's probably fair enough, because I would have had Raphael kill him on this last turn if he had been within range, just for that little extra bit of experience. But that doesn't happen, and instead we are able to dance Runen to seize the point and complete the map in 9 turns. And that leaves Runen at long last with a clear path directly to his homeland of Rosalia, which we are going to be liberating in the next map. That's all for this video, and I will see you next time.